Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Cup Duet Reviews, brought to you by Cup of Hemlock Theatre. I will be your host for this episode, Ryan Borochovitz, co-artistic producer here at Cup of Hemlock, and I'm joined by my other co-artistic producer, Mackenzie Horner. Hi, Mac. How are you
Buongiorno,
today?
friends. Hello.
Hello. And today we are going to be talking about The Chinese Lady, the play by Lloyd Suh, which is directed by Marjorie Chan, being presented here in Toronto by Studio 180 Theatre and Fujian in association with Crow's Theatre. And it's playing at the Streetcar Crow's Nest until May 21st.
That's right.
So, yeah, this is a very exciting production that we can't wait to dive into. But before we get too deep into the weeds, Mac, I have to ask you, what is in your cup?
Well, today I'm drinking a glass of Diet cranberry juice with a sprig of Diet 7-Up in there just to give it some fizz.
Okay.
So, there we go. Ryan,
lovely.
what sayeth you?
I have in my The Cup, I have tea because it felt thematically appropriate to the show.
I would have had tea, but it's such a hot, beautiful spring day. I was like, I can have tea.
Yeah, that's fair. I decided to grin and bear it for the sake of thematic consistency, but
beautiful.
Yes, it's good for the show. There's a lot of tea mentioned.
There is a ton of tea mentioned.
All right, so we will put up a spoiler shield a little into the conversation, but to start things off, yes, much like the little chalkboard that is carried around the show that if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see right behind Mac there. We will have that spoiler image, but before we get into it, I feel like we should start with some non-spoiler content to help people decide if they want to see this show. So Mac, why don't you get us started? Yes, it is a very good show. You know, cards on the table. We both enjoyed this a lot, and
we did.
Now you're going to hear about why. So Mac, do you want to start with maybe just a brief plot description, non-spoiler?
Sure. I will do my best. So this play tells the story, the recollection, performance of a Chinese immigrant named Afong Moy, who was brought over in 1834? No.
1830 something.
1830 something, yes.
You know, grain.
Yes, anyway, but she was 14 years old when she did. Did not speak great English, but she was brought over to be kind of like a Asian exhibition set piece, basically, because at that time, once again, not a great time in our history, but these white men would go over to these different cultures of the world. They would bring back some of the locals and then cheaply display them in their culture. As you can see here, only 25 cents for adults, 10 cents for children, to watch these people walk around, eat their meal, things like that. So she's brought over at 14 years old. She's put on display in kind of this faux Asian style room. And she is partnered with a gentleman named Atang, who is not important.
He is irrelevant.
He is irrelevant. Thank you.
As we find out over the course of the show, he very much is not irrelevant.
Exactly.
He is quite important.
Very important. Yes, but he is bilingual. So he is there to translate what she says to the audience and then to give them a description of what she's doing. So basically, the show starts as if we're actually doing a presentation. And then from there, we learn about foot binding, tea, the Asian tea, the meals they eat, things like that. And then basically the presentation ends. Then basically they reset and start again. But every time a reset happens, loses a bit of her culture. And so by the time we get toward the end of the show, she's lost all of her Chinese heritage attire and she's kind of gone into this black outfit. And then as the piece progresses, she ends up working for P.T. Barnum. No, not the Hugh Jackman guy, the real P.T. Barnum, who was a horrible human being who did some very horrible exploitative things. She then ages out, which is a big deal, that she gets to be in her 40s. And so P.T. Barnum decides to bring in a 14-year-old to replace her because obviously younger is better in his eyes.
I feel like we're getting kind of deep into the spoilers in this non-spoiler description.
Sorry.
You're describing things that happen in the back half of the play.
Sorry. So anyway, so she is let go, and then basically from there, she then goes on a journey throughout the rest of America from there. And that's kind of where we'll leave off.
Yeah, so it's kind of, she is both historically and in the play, she is considered to be the very first Chinese woman to set foot on American soil. That there had been Chinese men prior to that point, Afong being the example in the play of one, but that it is very considered exotic that she is the first female Chinese person and is therefore treated as this museum piece, sideshow, fetish object for the white gaze. Yeah, and it's kind of an interesting snapshot history of kind of the first 10 chapters of Iris Chang's The Chinese in America. If anybody's read that history book, in terms of through the lens of this one very isolated individual, we get this kind of broad strokes view of key flashpoints in the history of Chinese culture and diaspora in America, and things through like the gold rush, the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, and all the way up to the ratification and renewal of the Chinese Exclusion Act at the turn of the 20th century. So we kind of look through the kind of atemporal lens of this very specifically historically situated person. We get this kind of broader stroke view of history, is in a nutshell what this play is kind of doing.
Yeah. Well said, Ryan. Well said. Well said.
So, do you want to just talk general appraisal of what you enjoyed before we get into the kind of more specific spoiler zone?
I mean, I will just come right off the bat and say, I love this piece. This piece was superb. Both the performers, who we will get into further, are the only two performers in the whole show. And oh my goodness, the amount of talking. Like, Rosie basically never stops talking except for one brief moment where Afong takes over briefly for a short slip of time. But for the most part, it's her on stage the whole time. She never leaves the stage and is just talking the whole time. And the amount of memorization that has to be done. I think there was only one time where she slipped up ever the slightest and she quickly corrected the line.
And that's just simple opening night issues. I'm sure that'll get ironed out instantly.
Oh, yeah. But like, that's a natural thing of being a performer too. So it's not like it's a huge faux pas. No, it's quite a human thing, actually. So, and she plays this role very much as a human character. And as someone who has enjoyed reading and studying American history, the fact that I could kind of weave my way through some of the moments she's going to be talking about and kind of catch them before everybody else does was a bit of a fun bit of, okay, I know where we're going here. That's not a good thing to be going to. Let's not do that. Like, don't head west. It doesn't end well if you head west. That type of thing there. So, I just thoroughly enjoyed the performance. I thought both Rosie Simon and John Ng did very well together. She did a very good chemistry with one another. I mean, even though the set was very spare, it was still beautiful and still was so representative. Like, you can see here, she's kind of in this box. And the fact that they found the right type of bars that actually makes it still like a short prison bar that she's sitting in. So it really does feel like a cage still. I mean, just the detail of that. Then also the fact, like, even in the costume design, like Afong wears a hat. And then he takes the hat off and you find out, the hat that he has is not really a braid. It's once again, it's a cultural misrepresentation of this culture where basically it's like, well, what do you think it looks like? And then, you kind of get those horrible Hollywood stereotypes of they had the long braid in their hair. They had the kind of the long mustaches, that type of thing there. Where it's like, ooh, definitely not good. But once again, it fits with the story of cultural exploitation for the white gaze. So it was very well done. I mean, and the story breaks your heart. It really does. It really does. When you find out all the other things that have been going on behind her back, it really is tragic. And there's historical moments that got brought up that I hadn't really read about. I mean, I knew some of the horrible atrocities that have been committed in like across North America towards Asian communities, but this play really did dive deep and gave some more touch points of, this has been a very long and bloody road that has gone on between these two cultures, and it's really tragic, absolutely. And so I think it hit the right note where at times the audience kind of laughed a bit, maybe uncomfortably, maybe because they knew the foreshadowing of this means doom. This doesn't end well. But then the minute it actually does take the turn, the audience was never laughing uncomfortably. They were very much attentive and there. And I think that's a great thing of the story is you follow the optimism of, but then you also, when she starts to lose her optimism as the world continues to beat her down, you feel that pain because you're wanting her to succeed. You're wanting her to achieve her dream of going to Pittsburgh, of all places. But then, it's one of those things of just how life really can screw people over sometimes. And so I think it was a really beautiful piece. Ryan?
Yeah, like well said. And
Thank you.
Just to add to all of that, yeah, this play is very much my cup of tea. That, yeah, like fans of the show know that I'm very much interested in plays that creatively engage with history, and this play does that, which we can get more into in the specifics post spoiler. But yes, it scratched all of my kind of favorite dramaturgical itches in just the right way. Lloyd Suh is an up-and-coming American playwright, and this play, I think, is a very good testament to his talent and his ability to weave these histories very elegantly into a very strong, tight package. And of course, our two performers are both amazing, who we'll talk more about after the spoiler. But yeah, like it's just such a tightly done production. It's very creative. All of the elements come together very perfectly to present just this really great kind of walking tour. I didn't realize that was going to be a pun when I started saying it, but a little walking tour of Asian American history through this very specific, interesting, often forgotten historical lens. I mentioned, the book, The Chinese in America by Iris Chang at the beginning, which has a very brief passage about Afong Moy historically in it. And there's like a footnote in that passage that says information about her life is, I forget the exact quote, and I don't have the book here, but monstrously unavailable. It was something to that effect. And that was in quotation marks from another source that she cited. So this play does an excellent job of trying to imagine what her life must have been like. Marjorie Chan, the director, mentioned in her program note how there's very obvious parallels to Sarah Bartman, aka Venus Hottentot, who we know a lot about, and we've seen various dramatic portrayals of, most famously by Susan Laurie Parks in the play Venus. But it's kind of very important to show that a lot of these subaltern cultures were exhibited in this way, that it wasn't just something that happened to this one specific person who you've maybe seen a play about before, that this is something that comes up a lot throughout colonial history in this way. And I think this is just such an interesting way of giving her a life, commenting on the histories that she, by her own admission, would not have been privy to in time, but using her as a mouthpiece for all of this. So this is an excellent piece. I would strongly recommend anybody check it out. I'll reiterate the dates before we go to spoilers. This is The Chinese Lady by Lloyd Suh, which is presented by Studio 180 in Fujian in association with Crow's Theatre. It's playing at the Streetcar Crow's Nest until May 21st. You don't want to miss this one. This is a very strong piece. All right.
I agree.
So shall we bring out our little spoiler chalkboard?
Agreed.
If you want spoilers, it's 25 cents for adults or 10 cents for children.
Ryan, I will include that on the chalkboard.
And maybe those prices will increase over the course of the review. That's probably too much editing to ask. But much like now that we are in spoilers, the price of admission does increase over the course of the play. We are past the spoiler zone. We could talk about anything. What do you want to start with? Should we dive into the cast?
Let's dive into the cast.
And use that as a lens into the characters themselves?
Yes.
So Rosie Simon, I think it feels appropriate to start with her as the titular Chinese lady, Afong Moy.
Who Jill knows.
Yeah, so Jill
worked with her.
Jill of this golden trio of Cup of Hemlock was just with Rosie at the Women at Plays festivals. I think it was back in February at Red Sandcastle. Rosie was in a play called Eminent Domain, which I saw, and it was very good. And so it was very exciting to see her in this again. Yeah, it's a funny thing. I believe, Rosie, if you're watching this, correct me if I'm wrong, that she is actually of Korean heritage herself. So she's not herself a Chinese lady, but
interesting.
And there's a lot of kind of interesting conversations to have about Pan-Asianness, especially in theatrical representation. I have this book right here, Josephine Lee's Performing Asian America. And it's funny, after I came home from the show and I was reading through all the articles that I'd taken from the QR codes, you're well past the spoiler point now, we'll talk more about QR codes in a second, but I was reading through those articles and it kind of, I don't know what possessed me to do this. I wanted to flip through these two books that I have just for various research purposes out from the library right now. One of them is Josephine Lee's Performing Asian America, and the other is National Objection by Karen Shimikawa. These two sort of landmark research books of Asian American theater. The first one's from like 97, the other's from 2002. So they're kind of maybe a little dated now, but they are kind of watershed texts in this.
Right.
And Josephine Lee talks a bit about, this rhetoric of interchangeability that comes about with Asian actors needing to take whatever role can come by them. And, maybe that's something that's changing now as we become more cognizant of various identities. But while Lee in the book says that there's maybe some, negative effects of this myth of interchangeability, to quote, like, all Asians look alike is how she puts that. She sees something positive in this Pan-Asian coalition of solidarity, that they have common interests in these diasporas, that even though they're not culturally interchangeable, it does make sense to, tell these stories collectively and not just be like, oh, well, we don't have a Chinese actor, so we can't tell this story. Although in Toronto, in 2023, it's interesting that we do have more access to various actors from various communities. And none of this is to negate Rosie's performance. I think she did an excellent job, and I think it is in the stunning job, and it is in the spirit of Pan-Asian Coalition that we can appreciate her performance in this role. But yeah, so what did you think of Rosie? Let's talk about the performance.
Yeah, sure, Rosie. Well, once again, like I said, she never slipped up, really. And when you're doing basically a one-woman show, like John is there as well, and he's very active, but a lot of talking goes to Rosie in the script. And just, once again, just the appreciation for the amount of focus and attention to details and memory work is incredible. Like, not many people can do this type of performance. Like, it takes a lot of charisma, it takes a lot of energy to hold the focus of an audience for 90 minutes, basically. Because basically, now that we're past the spoiler slate, Tung leaves her for the last third of the show. Basically, he's not there. He leaves because he's still going to be with P.T. Barnum, and she's out. And so she's on her own. And, it's a very tragic moment when they leave each other. But just her commitment to details, and like the way she walks, for example, up until basically almost the end, she kind of goes back, like basically when she takes off the skirt and her feet are actually revealed, she's walking in that kind of small binded foot walking step. And then when she's out of that, then out of the skirt and her feet are actually shown, she walks normally. Or I don't know if normal is the right non-binded feet way.
Yeah, she walks as herself, Rosie the actor, not
Correct.
Afong Moy, the perpetually injured performer. Yes, or character.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, she just held my focus. Like, the minute you walked into the space and you saw her sitting in that chair, being this exhibit that everybody walks in and I mean, everyone is kind of talking about, oh yeah, there you go. Like, oh my God, you and I were sitting there in the audience going, look at that. Look at that focus she has, where she's not even moving. She's just really staring straight ahead. And then during the show, her comments on how she hears audience comments all the time about things like that. And it's like, oh, Ryan, we fell into the trap.
That's something that this show very much has on its mind, of this idea of like the ethics of spectatorship in the gaze, and what it means to see and be seen in this regard. Yeah,
exactly. And so, she did a beautiful job. I mean, it's just such a moving story that she tells. And at one point, because she kept getting older. Like, at one point, she's getting into her 80s, and I'm like, does Rosie is like Afong Moy and gonna get is she gonna have a death scene somewhere at the end here? But then really she doesn't, because she lives on, because she say, like, I'm 200 years old, but here are all my artifacts, and you can explore them. Now, Rosie does go on to say that these are not the exact artifacts, because we don't have them, but these are very close representations of items that would have been found in the exhibit. And then she puts in the QR codes that tie to different articles. But no, like, it was all so well done. It was just so beautifully a seamless show. There was never any moments of long pauses or anything like that. Everything just felt like it flowed beautifully. So I just say bravo to Rosie. Bravo to Rosie. Ryan?
Yeah, Rosie was amazing in this. I feel like her performance had the perfect blend, and this is very hard to do well, but the perfect blend of mechanical, because she is kind of
Hello.
Like
she's Afong Moy.
She is reciting a script, at least like in a lot of these parts of she is presenting an idea of Asianness or Chineseness that for the consumption of the audience. And it is like she's following a script of this kind of mechanical procedure, but there's a very clear beating heart underneath it. And the fact that she's able to, navigate that needle thread so well was, I think, just a huge testament to her performance. And as we had the time skips, she became, more mature. Comfortable. More mature, more comfortable with her English. She never got to the point where even if she's saying that she's 80 years old or 200 years old, she never played an old lady, but we got to see this kind of emotional maturity developing over the course of all this. And with that frustration that there's a mounting idea of this American dream, if you will, that I thought my life was when I first came here really isn't the case, and that I am not doing anything productive to, bind the ties between these two cultures, that I am just something for consumption. And that, she played it so well. The Andrew Jackson scene, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment, that was just heart-wrenching to see the way she extended her foot out and in a very tastefully, metaphorically visual way, which I think is the right way to handle a scene like that. But everything about this kind of wry cynicism meets this, very emotionally impactful beating heart is just such a wonderful element of her performance. Do you want to talk about Jianing, who played Tung?
Yes, please. Yes. The other part of this dynamic duo, who, right from when you walk into the room, he is moving around the space, sweeping, curating the exhibit, basically. And he has such a fascinating role in this show because he doesn't say as much, because he is, what is Ryan, inconsequential?
Yeah, I think irrelevant or inconsequential.
Irrelevant, thank you. Yes.
I don't remember what the exact word was, but we are told
him down, basically.
We are told from the beginning that he's not important. You're not here to see him. He's just a facilitator.
Exactly. And to play someone who is basically meant to be just a wallflower, who you're not supposed to watch, he draws your eye all the time in the best possible way, because the moments where he really reveals his true frustration at the world are so heartbreaking. The fact he has to stand by so quietly and watch these horrible moments and these horrible exhibitionists take advantage of them and their culture, and he can say nothing and do nothing because, as he says, I have no family, like no relations. The only person I ever connected with was this 14-year-old girl who. There's a moment where there's a bit of a weird reveal of the relationship, where maybe he has some deeper feelings for her. I don't know if that was the way we were supposed to take it. I don't know, Ryan. What do you think?
Well, he has this kind of monologue that happens in the middle where he, time freezes and he talks about his both nighttime dreams and daydreams. And he mentions that in one dream, he puts on her outfit and she puts a flower in his hair, and he's like, I'm the one who everybody comes to see, and she's my interpreter. And in this dream, we are lovers. And he says in that same monologue that, which is surprising to me because I have no desire for her whatsoever in my waking life, which I think, we're supposed to take that as being sincere, but his subconscious has brought him to the revelation that he desires that which is forbidden to him, and he kind of extends this view in desire for the white ladies who come to see her, and even the white men. He wants to knock off their top hats, and because he lives in this perpetually subservient role, the things he wants aren't even things that he truly necessarily desires, but it's just the lack of power gives him this urge to turn the tables and flip the script.
Yeah, exactly. So that moment is such a fascinating moment, because throughout this whole first part of the show, he's just kind of been performing the duties that he's supposed to do. And then he does reenact the scene with Andrew Jackson, who, once again, one of my least favorite presidents of all time.
Yeah, he's
down there at the bottom of the list.
He's down there for sure.
Yeah. Oh, God, that man. But just, that foot scene. Oh, it just makes me so mad. We will get into that more. But just the detail he does, because he really ages his body throughout the show. He goes from kind of being very upright to, by the time he leaves, he is much more hunched over and is moving slower. And you see the toll of this life has taken on him. That he basically says, I've lived in obscurity and I will die in obscurity. I will not be remembered for anything. I will be just a footnote in history. Like, even like if you were to write a history book about Afong Moy, the Chinese lady, would anybody really mention him?
Well, the
Like,
question.
I gotta know, Ryan. Like, in the book, do they mention him at all that you read?
Oh, well, the book
Or
barely even mentions Afong Moy. She
exactly.
herself is a bit of a footnote in history.
Yeah.
And Atong, I would wager that Atong as a character, a person, was invented by Lloyd Suh for this play. Surely there must have been somebody acting as a translator, but
yes.
What little we know about Afong Moy herself, whoever that translator may have been, I think is completely invented and characterized for the sake of this piece. And he gives someone for her to talk to, and somebody who has more of a worldwide outsider perspective, where he's been to Pittsburgh and does not want to go back. We never find out what happened there or why, but it creates a very good sense of how insular Afong Moy's perspective is, that this is somebody who has been here longer than her. We never quite get a sense of how old he is. He describes himself as eternal, and he, shows more of the history from without that she never really gets privy to. But at the same time, he does devote his whole life to servitude for her, for originally the Carnes brothers, I think their name was, and P.T. Barnum. And then he, even though at the end of the play he says, like, I probably don't have many years left, I'm going to die soon, he remains at the museum, and he's going to be continuing his service for the much more impressive replacement that they're bringing in from China.
So, no, he's did a beautiful job. And I mean, once he's out of the story, you do feel his absence. You absolutely, like I was waiting for him to come back on and go, no, I'm coming with you, but then it's like, nope, she is truly left on her own for the last third of the show. And his absence is definitely felt, because he's been present since you walked into the room. And now he's just gone. And it's one of those things of, you can't imagine as a 14-year-old child with no real experience whatsoever of Western world. And so you only really relate to this man. And then he's gone. You're now in your 40s. You've only really ever interacted with one other person. And that other person just said, I'm sorry, I can't go any further. What do you do? It's like, oh my goodness, like you're losing your like an arm, basically. You're losing an appendage of yourself because you've been together for over 30 years. It's like, it's just tragic. It's just tragic. So, but it's beautifully done. Beautifully done. So, yeah. All right, where to next?
Yeah. Well, actually, before we get off of John-ing, there's one scene in particular I do want to shout out, and then maybe we'll use that to get into the Andrew Jackson scene that we've already alluded to. But the scene of John-ing's that I really want to highlight is, I think it's maybe, I don't remember if it's immediately before his big monologue or shortly before it. But he just has a moment on stage alone where he takes the bowl of food that she very performatively eats from with her chopsticks. And
it's after Andrew Jackson.
It's after Andrew Jackson?
Yes.
Okay.
It's like toward the end of his big monologue.
Okay, I thought it was before after Andrew Jackson, but before his monologue.
Maybe that's it, yeah. Around that.
If anybody has the script handy and wants to correct us, please do.
We would happily love to read the script.
Yes. Yeah, the script's published. You can read it.
Oh, perfect.
It's, in like an actor's edition.
Ah, very good.
But yeah, so this moment where he just takes the bowl of food and kind of just gets in there and like eats it and savors it, and it's just such a heartbreaking moment of, we know he's not paid basically anything for this. He's just a prop here, but this is providing a life for him, but he's not being adequately compensated. And just, while we know that Afong Moy is being fed bread and corn by the ship captain's wife that she's living with, and potatoes, all of these foods,
which she says does not do well for her digestion.
It doesn't, but we at least know that she's being fed.
Right.
And therefore, when she has to performatively eat authentic Chinese food for the audience's entertainment, it's really just spectacle. It's not satisfying her. She has little nibbles, but then this tiny little bowl, when Atong kind of gets in there, he's like, we could see the hunger, the craving, like in him, and it was just, that moment gave me shivers. And it also kind of interestingly plays with the double meaning of his name, which phonetically Atong, he is her tongue, he speaks for her, he is her voice, but also he's hungry, he needs to eat, has all these desires and cravings, as we hear about in his monologue, that just cannot be satisfied. because of his lot in life. And so that was an excellent moment that really, I think, highlighted Johnning's performance here in this great way. And even though he is not the focal piece, he is certainly not irrelevant, in my opinion.
Oh, goodness, not at all.
No, and I don't think anybody could watch the show and think he is, which is so wonderful. And he did a great job, as did Rosie. They were a perfect duo for this performance.
Agreed.
All right.
Agreed.
Do you want to talk about one of the worst presidents ever?
Oh, let's do it, Ryan.
The Emperor of America, Emperor Jackson.
Oh, yeah. Ryan, you can start this one. I want to hear what your thoughts are.
All right. So right off the bat, I'll say this is another great moment that I refrained from talking about earlier about Johnning's performance, because the way he switched back and forth. So, okay, for those somehow watching past the spoiler shield who haven't seen the production, there's a moment in the middle when Afong Moy is in Washington, D.C., and she gets to meet President Andrew Jackson, who she thinks is the Emperor of America, because her cultural knowledge has not yet reached, a certain point.
Yeah.
And naturally, her English is very minimal, so Attung comes to translate, and she's now telling us this story, and she wants herself and Attung to reenact it for the audience, how it all happened. And it's a very interesting moment of theater here, because we are kind of entering this flashback as if it's being told to us, but it's very clearly not being told to us, because there's a lot of things happening in this scene that the characters themselves aren't really privy to, because we know that Attung himself wasn't able to keep up with some of the things that Jackson was saying in English. And so unless he just memorized all of the phonetic sounds so he could recreate it for us, the audience, this is clearly doing something interesting with time and space here, as so much of this play does. But so John does this really interesting switching back and forth where he sits in the chair and has like a southern drawl and becomes Jackson, and then stands up, becomes himself again, showing the very flawed, not translation, interpretation that leads to very little actual communication in the conversation between Afong Moy and Jackson, where she has these big lofty ideas about how she could play somewhat of an ambassadorial role in, bringing these two cultures together, educating Americans about the Chinese and vice versa. But Afong Moy, Attung, who himself has very limited English, less limited than hers, but still is unable to adequately translate this, and he just kind of really bare basics, and Jackson has no idea that she's trying to communicate these big ideas, and then thus himself continues to see her as nothing more than a fetish object, which culminates in the horrifying beat of him demanding to touch her bound feet. Which, what a moment. And it was, like we said earlier, it was very tastefully handled in the staging, but, it is the fact that it wasn't staged literally almost made it more impactful.
Well, leads you to your imagination of this white old man feeling up this woman's foot.
Yeah. There's almost like horrifically, there's a little moment of humor in there of when Attung says this is like an unusual request. And he says, well, I'm not a usual man. And when Afong Moy asks, what did he say? He says, he is strange man. Which it made me chuckle during this horrifying moment. But that is indeed why he wants to touch her feet. He is a strange man.
Yes, he is.
So this, both performers, all three characters, because, John is playing both Attung and Jackson, and he characterizes them very differently in this moment. Excellent job guiding us through this really shocking moment. But what were your thoughts about it?
Well, I mean, so as someone who has read American history, as I said, Andrew Jackson is definitely toward the bottom of the list for all the atrocities he committed, particularly the Road of Tears, when he forced the First Nations to march off their land and basically slaughtered them.
Which was addressed in the play.
It was. But it's just one of those things where we have done a disservice to younger generations because our history programs are not properly done. We get the basics of, we came, we settled, we did this, but we gloss over everything else. And because of that, people do not understand other cultures' pain because we're only getting one perspective. We need to have a better history program in both America and Canada that properly talks about both the good and the bad of our country's history. We've achieved many great things. We had the Gettysburg Address. We've had many great moments throughout our history, but we've also had some terrible, horrible moments where we have slaughtered and killed so many people who did not have to die. And our programs do a disservice. Like, Ryan, you wonderfully got all these QR codes for us. And so many of them are about the Hell's Canyon Massacre, like the Spring Rocks Massacre, the Chinese Massacre of 1871. Like, I guarantee in most history books, those are not talked about. Just as we up here in our Canadian history textbooks do not talk about the atrocities that went on during our transcontinental railroad that Sir John A. Macdonald commissioned. But it's like, we need to do a better job of this, because I guarantee so many people in the audience do not know these historical events in any way, because how many documentaries have we made about JFK, about Abraham Lincoln, about the founding fathers, about the Liberty Bell, about the Civil War? But yet we have not. But I guarantee you there have been far less documentaries made about the forgotten Los Angeles history of the Chinese Massacre of 1871. Mm-hmm. This play highlights the unbalancedness of the way we view history. And there are people in the world today who go, we cannot teach children history this way because it'll make them feel bad about what went on in the past. It's no, you will not feel bad because you did not commit those atrocities, but you need to know about those atrocities so you can make sure you don't repeat those atrocities and perpetuate the outcome of those atrocities down the road. Like, they talk about the Congress Act, the Anti-Chinese Immigration Congress Act that was done. I know no history book that really ever gets into that, but it's like,
so like you're thinking like elementary or high school history textbooks. There are a lot of books that have been written about this, to be clear.
Needs to be taught, yes. because once you get post-secondary, you don't have to take history classes anymore. There should be a mandatory history class from grade 4, all the way up to grade 12. Every year you have to take history and study a different part of history and get deep, get dirty, because history is a gray zone where you're going to find some great achievements, and you're also going to find some horrible things. And you're not going to make people feel bad for learning about your history. The only way you feel bad is by not knowing and then you making the mistake again. So, end of my soapbox rant. This play did a beautiful job showing the history that we don't talk about enough that we should, because the Asian communities of North America deserve, just like our First Nation communities deserve, just like our BIPOC communities all deserve, to have their history properly represented in the textbook. Not this kumbaya-ness that, oh yes, Abraham Lincoln came in and signed the Emancipation Act, and then along came LBJ many years later and signed the Civil Rights Act.
A lot of things got skipped in that trajectory.
Right? But that's exactly it. Yeah. That's exactly it. But, we're all going to tote the great achievements of those two men and totally go over everything else that went on. We're only going to talk about the small part of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. When you realize that actually, by the time they both died, they actually were kind of flipping positions a bit. Malcolm X was becoming much more one suing for peace and finding a way to come to the table. Malcolm X was getting a lot angrier and frustrated with the world. But the history books don't mention that at all, really. It kind of goes, yeah, no, they both were kind of Professor X and Magneto. They were on the opposite ends of the spectrum and never kind of change position or get deeper. But it's like, we deserve to have a proper history program in North America that gives the history as it was, not how we would have liked it to be, where we were all kumbayaing and happy doodle dandying. No. We it was great. We killed, we took over, we did a whole bunch of shit. Nobody's hands are clean in history, and everybody deserves to have the full story told so you can understand it, and so then you can learn and grow from it. By protecting and hiding the history of the world, we are doomed to repeat the same mistakes. And the fact that we have people flying swastikas so openly in the world, and the rise of Asian hate in the world is skyrocketing, just shows that we have not learned from our history because we were not taught the history, and therefore we are going to be doomed to make the same horrible mistakes again. Soapbox done, Ron. I'm taking a drink.
All right, soapbox. Yeah. No, it's good that these are the thoughts that you are supposed to come out of this play thinking. So it's it's not inappropriate to bring it up. And I think well said. It's at the end of the day, it's not even just that they don't teach history sufficiently, is that they teach skewed versions of history. Yes. Trump very openly modeled himself after someone like Andrew Jackson, this conservative figurehead that he saw himself as the next version of, and people in his base love him for it, and that's what they want to go back to. If only it was just, we skip over Andrew Jackson in history because we were embarrassed by the terrible things he does. I'm a lot more afraid of venerating the terrible things he did and seeing them as a model for the again that MAGA is referring to and those kind of ideological positions. So if contact your representatives, I guess, is the lesson
or
here.
What? Like down in the States, the parents are much more involved in the school boards and things like that. And up here, we have more elected representatives. So when you are electing your education representatives on the board, or if you are a parent down in the States who can run for a school board position that's going to help craft the curriculum in some way, be active. Don't let people who don't represent the way you want to see history taught get in there, because they will twist it. And the fact that we are having people down on both sides saying we should abolish the education departments and let it go down to local levels. No, like, oh my God, it just makes me so mad, Ryan. The topic of history in schools, as someone who is a avid history buff who likes to read and study history, but so many people who don't, and then they don't get the proper historical background they need. It just makes me so mad. So mad, because you can admire someone. Like, I admire President Kennedy. You know me, Ryan. I'm a Kennedy buff. That as one of the eras of history I particularly enjoyed studying. But I can also acknowledge he was a womanizer. He only toward the end of his life did he really start to look at civil rights, because he stopped viewing it as a political issue, more as a human issue. Like, he was a flawed man. He was not a demigod who, was this King Arthur figure. No, he was a flawed man who made many mistakes, but also did a lot of very powerful, inspiring things at the same time. But it's like people need to understand that and not just go, Sir John A. Macdonald, great guy. It's like, no, he did a lot of bad things in order to create the Canada we know. But he also was a man who had a great pain in his life. He was a lifelong alcoholic, but somehow still did a lot of interesting things. He was still able to do a lot. It's like once again, you got to be people. Be more active. Be open to the gray. Not all life is black and white. People are humans, and you got to learn humanity by studying humanity, both the good and the bad.
Yeah, don't trust X-Men comic books to teach you the history of civil rights, I guess, is the takeaway here. And I guess I feel like, these are pretty decent notes to kind of approach the end on, but something that I do say here, we've alluded to the QR codes here, but something that I don't actually know if this is foundational to the play. I want to read the script of the play and see, but something this production at least did is that at the very end, Rosie, as she's giving her final monologue, was putting down these little QR code plaques. Yes. She was putting them all over the stage. And she didn't mention them or what they meant during her monologue, which makes me think it was probably specific to this production and not inherent to the play, especially since, it's kind of difficult putting topical technologies in plays, because if this is going to get produced 20 years from now, will we even still be using QR codes, or will we have something different? Yeah. So it makes me think that this is specific to the production. If so, Marjorie Chan, excellent directorial choice, because I think this is a stroke of brilliance. But then after they did curtain call, Rosie said, we have these QR codes all around the stage. Please feel free to scan them. But if you don't get to scan them, the links to all of them are available on the Studio 180 website, which we will put a link. We will put the link in there, because I want people to read these. If you if you saw the show but didn't scan them, or if you haven't seen the show but still want to educate yourself on Asian American history. And each of these QR codes. And at first, I scanned the first one, which was a PBS NewsHour. It was kind of just it
was the long history of racism against Asian Americans in the U.S.
Exactly. So I scanned that first one and I thought, this is a handy thing that's kind of checking us into all the historical moments that the play gave these sidewise allusions to. But then I think it was you who pointed out to me that, oh, I got a different one. And I'm like, oh, are they all different? And I went around scanning all of them, and I read them last night because it was very, very informative. I think this is such a brilliant thing that, yes, I'm the first person, as Mac, with our many arguments about Amadeus, for example, but I'm the first person to say that historical drama does not have an obligation to adequately or accurately represent the history that it's representing, that they exist in different worlds. Historical drama gets an additional layer of referentiality and meaning by alluding to the real world and calling to mind things that we know, but we shouldn't trust plays to educate us because they have the freedom to take poetic license. And I think Lloyd Suh would be the first to acknowledge that the portrait of Afong Moy that he created in this play isn't accurate to the history because he doesn't have sources to work from. He had to imagine what her life might have been like, but who knows? We can be pretty sure, as the play itself acknowledges, that she didn't know about a lot of the things she was talking about, and this is more of an author's god-eye view than the actual historical subject who never got to leave the four walls of her diorama.
Right.
So I'm a big advocate for, literacy of truth claims and understanding, that a play can only tell us so much, but you should do research outside of the play and don't take the things you saw in a work of historical fiction as the basis of your understanding. What I love about these QR codes is that Marjorie Chan agrees with me because she's like, the play was a good introduction to these things, but here are non-fictional historical sources with which you can read up about it and inform yourself.
Amadeus should have the same thing in their program. Scan these QR codes so you can get some historical articles to properly understand Salieri and Amadeus.
I love this, and I want all, or at least more, historical plays to do things like this because, it's acknowledging that the play tells you a version of history, but it isn't the version of history, and it's not a suitable replacement for your own research. Now, it doesn't mean that now go off and research wildly yourself. This is curating a research list here for you.
It's giving you an option
to inform yourself, and a lot of the things, some of them are specifically about what we know of Afong Moy in particular, but other things just about the moments in history that maybe the play didn't introduce you to sufficiently, or is banking on the fact that you maybe already know about this. But I think this is just such a brilliant strategy for anchoring the historical drama back into the history and opening up a gateway with which we can learn about history without relying on the fictionalized text to do that education for us. So, loved this convention so much. And I, as a compliment to your soapboxing there, I would say, this is the perfect balance of entertaining historical drama that can make you laugh, make you feel things, play with poetic license in creative ways without compromising the fact that there is still history that we should still teach ourselves, even if it's not the play itself's job to do so.
Yes. Agreed.
Yes.
Agreed. Yeah, no. Yeah, I love this idea of the QR codes. I think every historical show, like even like Henry V by Shakespeare, you should put in that program. You want to know more about Henry V? Scan these QR codes, and you can read up about the real man who is often portrayed as like this Prince Charming character. It's like he actually was kind of a two-faced character because he had a giant arrow stuck in his cheekbone. Like you read about the real historical Battle of Agincourt and kind of how his whole argument to going there is very like iffy to begin with. So it's like these type of historical things are so great because I left going, I want to read more about the long history of racism against Asian Americans, or the Spring Rock Massacre, because she briefly brings them up, but it's like, okay, actually, I want to read more about that because I don't know enough. So the fact that this play intrigued me and then gave me that resource right away, because unfortunately, we don't have copies of the script. So by the time you get home, trying to remember that, what was that one massacre she talked about? What was that again? And then you can't remember it, so then you kind of stop researching because it's like, can't remember it, don't have enough time to go be a historian and to go through every massacre that's happened. So the fact they give these resources right away, I'm like, brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Every show that's got a historical tie should have that. Richard III deserves to have a QR code put next to him in the program, because Shakespeare really screwed him over if you actually read the historical accounts of who he was. It was definitely a political hit job, that play was. A brilliant political hit job, but still a hit job that really screwed him over and really tainted our viewpoints. So I love that this play doesn't taint the viewpoint of the historical moments that are talked about in this, but they also give you more resources to go, because who knows, maybe this is down in the States and you may get somebody who's a big Andrew Jackson fan. Questionable, but there are people out there who do admire what he did. And, if they see this play for some reason and go, ooh, this gives me greater pause. And then there's a QR code that says the history of Andrew Jackson and his atrocities, you can scan and read that and actually enlighten the audience some more. Brilliant, because we should, as I said, don't hide the history, show the history, and give the people the resources to properly study the history. Like what the History Channel was supposed to do. Now it's become Forged in Fire and Ancient Aliens.
On that note, any last thoughts about the production you want to say, or are we
go see
able
it?
To
go see it. My final note is both John and Rosie are brilliant. Mm-hmm. This production by Marjorie Chan was brilliant. The costume design by Junhai Kim was stunning. Like, just the detail work. Mm-hmm. There.
The detail and the stripping away of each layer.
Yes.
And to the point where at the very end she's wearing essentially a crop top and the year is 2023. And everything was so well done. This is a stellar production.
Exactly.
If you've watched this far through the spoilers and haven't seen it yet, go see it and scan every single QR code and read them on the subway home.
Yeah. And also shout outs to Echo Zhao, who did the set design, as well as Kimberly Pertel, who did the lighting design as well. Mm-hmm. And also Gloria Mock,
I was just going to say Gloria Mock, who did the sound design, the gong effect for the changing of the time periods. Mm-hmm. Chef's kiss. That was just great. Oh, and Stephen Howe, who was assistant director in this.
Yes, very good.
Yes,
bravo to you, Stephen. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, on that note, Ryan, I think you just have to go see this show. Plain and simple. And they need to go and explore history more. That's the other big takeaway from this is go out and be curious. Don't just settle on that grade 10 history class you took. Go and be studious. Instead of reading 50 Shades of Grey, go out and buy a history book.
Or at least, if nothing else, scan the QR codes and read them. And then read further, but don't let us tell you what you should or shouldn't read. There's a whole wide world of history, and I'm sure you can find things that you will find interesting and worth exploring.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Ryan, give us that classic Ryan Borochovitz send off.
If you like me and want to follow all my theater opinions, you're already doing it here on Cup of Hemlock. Don't bother trying to follow me personally on social media, but we're at COH on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're Cup of Hemlock Theater on YouTube. If you're listening to this as a podcast, it's the Cup of Hemlock Theater podcast. Like, share, subscribe, do all those things. And if you want us to review your show, we have our email in the description of this. Send us your press release, your invites, your inquiries, and we will get back to you.
We'll also do artist interviews. I mean, Rosie or John, if you want to come talk to us and talk more about your experience. Marjorie, if you want to come talk to us, we'd be happy to host you as well. Because it's not just about the show. We do love also getting the artist viewpoints as well. So come on out. We're a theater enthusiast playground for you to come and join us in.
And Mac, where can people find and follow you?
Right. You can follow me at Mackenzie Horner on all social media platforms. You can follow my musical antics over at Before the Downbeat, a musical podcast. I am just finishing reviewing season 2 of the hit Apple TV show Schmigadoon, retitled Schmicago this season. There you go. It's lots of fun. Lots of musical Easter eggs there for any musical fan. And also some musicals that even I didn't quite catch right away. But, the more you read and study other people's opinions of the episodes, the more you can cultivate a bigger sense of the deep diving work those brilliant writers are doing. And on that note, please go support the WGA because they deserve to have their work properly represented and properly paid for because they do a lot of work. And if you watch Schmigadoon alone, the amount of breakneck episode writing they are doing and songwriting they are doing and detailing they are doing, it deserves proper payment and proper representation. So there you go.
Here.
Thank you.
All right. On that note,
everybody.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Again, go see The Chinese Lady, which is playing at Streetcar Crow's Nest until May 21st. Get your tickets because they probably will sell out, or at least they should.
Yes, they should. Ryan, my cup half runs dry. Again.
Okay, we'll be back with more reviews, more interviews.
Yes, we have one more in this trio of reviews.
Yeah, which it's funny for referring to it as a trio because it's like densely produced for us, but the audience will receive them in a timely manner.
Exactly.
Cheers.
All right, everybody. Cheers.